Welcome, everyone. We are just going to wait a little bit for more people to come on. We can see participants are signing on right now. Alrighty, it's 4 o'clock. I would like to start this Best Series program. This is our final and third panel in our series that we've had that has been so fantastic. We are recording these sessions and they reside on our Career Center website, Santa Barbara City College Career Center website, in the video library, and we welcome you to take a look at our past sessions. I'd like to welcome you to this one today, to the BEST series, and BEST stands for Beyond Expectations and Stereotypes. And this is a brainchild of Judge Von der Royen, who will explain what it is in just a little bit. But I'd like to introduce some of our folks before we get started who have been instrumental in helping to get this series off the ground. We have Dave Saunders, who is one of our amazing instructors in the Justice Studies Department. Christina McGuire, who is with me in the Career Center. She's our internship coordinator. And not with us today is Christine Urena, who is the director of the EOPS department. And we've all been collaborating to get this off the ground. I would like to ask you to put your questions in the Q&A. Christina McGuire will be moderating the questions at the end. So as you're thinking about your questions, just pop them right into the Q&A, and then we will be happy to share those with our panelists today. And at the very, very end, I'm going to close us out with just a brief survey. If you're willing to take it, we have a little QR code, and we'd be delighted to hear from you. Your feedback has been so meaningful to us, and we just would love to know your thoughts, both the positive and the negative, whatever works for you. We'd love to hear it. So with that, I would like to go ahead and hand this over now to the judge.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for Zooming in. I know it is tough and everyone is exhausted with Zoom, so I appreciate even more that you're willing to show up. I think that today you will learn a lot. It will be sort of a great way to end the series this semester. So I created this because I think it's so important to make sure that our legal professional, our community of attorneys, judges, should reflect our community, which includes a diverse community. And we don't really see that yet. We are making some progress, but there is still lots of work to be done. And I want to bring to you, students, the diverse group of attorneys and judges that are in your community, and that was the purpose of this. And so I wanted to end the series this semester with two very important people, Dean Jackie Gardina with the Santa Barbara and Ventura Colleges of Law, and Tony Tolbert, who is the Assistant Director of Admissions for UCLA Law School. And these two wonderful, amazing people are going to talk about their path and their experiences through law school and how they ended up where they are today in their current positions, and also talk to you about the different requirements for law school, some tips on how to get into law school, how much it may cost, what you should be prepared for, how you should prepare, and the differences between UCLA Law School and ABA accredited law school and Ventura and Santa Barbara colleges of law, and the different opportunities that both of the different colleges or the law schools have. So I will turn it over to Jackie and Tony. Thank you again for being here.
Thank you for having us. And I think, Tony, I'll allow you to go first, and then I can play off of everything that you've said in relation to your experience in UCLA. That
sounds great. Thank you for having me. And although I can't see any folks out there, I know you're out there. So it's a pleasure to be here, and appreciate you making time out of your busy schedules to join us. So I'll give you just a brief background on who I am, so you know where I'm coming from, and then tell you a little bit about what I do at UCLA, and give some just general suggestions about thinking through the pathway to law school and some things you might want to put in motion now and what you might line up for later down the line. And please, questions as they come up, jot them down or drop them in the chat, however you want to do it. So I'm from the San Fernando Valley. I imagine there's at least a couple of people out there that might be from the Valley. And then I attended undergraduate school not very far from where you all are at UC Santa Barbara. So I'm a proud graduate of UC Santa Barbara, and really enjoyed my time there. I had not spent any time in the Santa Barbara area, frankly, prior to attending undergraduate school. And then I took what's called a gap year now, although back when I was in school, we didn't call it that. You just said you were doing something else. And so I didn't go directly from undergraduate school to law school. I worked for a year in Sacramento for a state assemblywoman. There's a program called the Assembly Fellows Program. I think it's now called the Capitol Fellows Program, where it's designed for, it's a one-year experience where you get a chance to work with the legislature to get a sense of how government works and how laws are made, so forth and so on. And that was a really good experience. The member that I worked with was just a great mentor and support, and showed me sort of how that business worked. And I applied to law school during my senior year at UC Santa Barbara, and got a deferral, which is something that some law schools will allow you to do. You apply, they admit you, and then rather than you starting that very next year, you can take a year or sometimes 2 years away to do something else, and they'll hold a spot for you. So that's what I did. I went to Harvard for law school in Boston, Massachusetts. So I went back east. It was my first and only time living on the East Coast. So that was a whole different experience for me, growing up in sunny Southern California, having to deal with cold and snow and sleet and rain and all that. And, but it was a really wonderful experience, both educationally, but also personally. I think I grew in ways that might not have been the same if I had stayed locally. So that's something, you want to think about when you project forward in terms of your law school experience. What are you hoping to most get out of it? There are hundreds of really good law schools all across the country, many in California for sure. And so you want to think about, in addition to the formal education, what might be some of the informal education opportunities that might come along with being in a different part of the country, different part of the world. So just something to think about. I went to law school to try to find a way to work in the music and/or sports industries. I'm a music nut, I'm a sports nut, and I knew that I wasn't going to make that work on my talent. Can't sing, can't play, can't hoop well enough to be, in the NBA. So I figured, let me see if I can figure out some other way to get there. And law school seemed to be the best direct path for me. I was fortunate enough to land a job after I graduated at a law firm in Los Angeles. And there's all different sizes of law firms. There's big law firms that have upwards of 3,000 lawyers in their firm at different offices around the world, all the way down to solo practitioners, where you have one person who has their own law firm. The law firm that I went to was kind of medium size. We had one office in Los Angeles, and in that office there were different areas of interest that lawyers practice in. So there was a corporate department, so lawyers that handle different business matters. There was a tax department. There was a litigation department, and litigation is just a fancy word for trial. So these are the folks who if there was a dispute as between two parties or more parties, they would handle that. And I was able to work in the music department. Our music department represented a number of recording artists and represented some record companies. And so I was able to work there, and I enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. It was great being kind of in the mix of the area that I wanted to be in. And I did that for a couple of years. And then along the way, I realized that at least for me, working at a law firm wasn't going to be the best job fit. And that's probably another, maybe more overall lesson I'd encourage you all to think about is what's the right fit for you. Honestly, I had a very narrow view of the law. The view that I had was make as much money as I can make and go to as many cool parties as I could go to, being very candid about that. And I worked hard at all of that and had a lot of fun. I realized that working in a law firm just wasn't the best fit for me. The whole structure is lawyers and support staff for lawyers, and it felt like a very constricted and not a particularly diverse group. It wasn't particularly diverse ethnically. It wasn't diverse in terms of people's experiences per se. And so I wanted to find a different fit. And so I discovered what's called the in-house counsel or corporate counsel route, where instead of working for a law firm, you're working as a lawyer for a company or an organization. And so once I realized that that was available, and I wasn't familiar with that when I was going through college or going in law school or even as a first or second year lawyer. But once I found out what that was about, I said, wow, that seems like that might be a little more interesting, a little more in line with my personality and my vibe. So fast forward, I ended up working as an in-house corporate lawyer for a record company. I ended up working as an in-house lawyer for a company that makes sports trading cards, baseball cards, football cards. I was a lawyer for the Soccer World Cup tournament back in 1994 when the United States hosted the World Cup games for the first time, the Men's World Cup. I was a lawyer for that organizing committee. I was a lawyer for Ticketmaster. That typically elicits some boos and groans and hisses because nobody likes Ticketmaster. But it was cool. It was cool working there. And then my last job as a lawyer, I worked as a lawyer for a company that made customizable shoes on the internet. So it was an online footwear company that Shaquille O'Neal was one of the lead investors on. So got to that point, and I realized that what had propelled me through my career up until then was not going to propel me going forward. And so my thought of trying to make as much money as I can make and go to as many cool parties became somewhat hollow. And I wanted to find something that was more sustainable, something that I was more connected with. And so I decided I didn't want to be a lawyer anymore, but I didn't know what else to do because that's all that I had trained for. I wasn't quite sure how to pivot and transition. And I was talking to a friend of mine, and she says, well, when you think about the next step, she says, think back to a time in your life where you really felt lit up, where you really felt like you were doing what you were supposed to be doing. And I instantly thought back to when I was in undergraduate school at UCSB. I worked as an outreach counselor at a middle school in Oxnard. And once a week, I would drive down to Oxnard and counsel junior high school kids on study habits and test prep and college going and things like that. And I said, wow, if I could find something that had some of those aspects to it, I think that's something I would enjoy. So I quit being a lawyer. I applied for a job at UCLA. UCLA has an outreach program, a program called the Law Fellows Program. And I'll drop a link in the chat when I'm done talking. But it's designed to do what Her Honor said, which is to help diversify the legal profession. It's designed to support students coming from underrepresented backgrounds within the law, to give folks an idea of what law school looks like, to provide some assistance with the Lsat, the law school admission test, for preparing for that. And once I realized that that was available and something I could dig my teeth into, I was really excited and jumped into it with full force. So I did that for my first 14 years at UCLA Law, working with the Law Fellows Program, working with hundreds of really, really talented folks, much like many of you who were really committed to making themselves more competitive candidates prior to going to law school. They would come to UCLA for a series of Saturday academies. So just like you, taking time out of their day, out of their schedule, in furtherance of them seeking more information and getting more support. So I did that for 14 years. And then from there, worked in other capacities at the law school. I've worked in student affairs as a counselor. I've worked on some diversity and inclusion initiatives at UCLA Law, worked on some mental health initiatives. And now I work part-time in admissions. And so I read applications from people that are applying to law school and help make decisions on who we admit. I do recruiting events. So I travel around when we're not in the middle of a pandemic. I travel around the country and meet with prospective law students in different parts and different colleges and universities. So that's probably more about me than what you needed to know, but that's what you got. So that's me. Dean, do you want me to kick to you now, and then we'll trade off about the next part, or how do you want to handle it?
Yeah, that's fine. So I'll talk a little bit about myself, and then Tony, maybe you and I can switch off about the admissions process and what they can be thinking about and expect.
Great.
So I should have gone first because Tony had a much more exciting career when he first got out of law school than I did, but I'm going to try to jazz mine up a little bit. So I am actually not from California. I grew up in Iowa. And ever since I was a kid, I was told that I should be a lawyer. And I'm pretty sure that's because I argued with everyone about anything. And so I actually went into undergrad thinking that's what I was going to do. And I got back then what was a traditional political science degree with a history minor, with an eye towards taking the Lsat and entering law school right after undergrad. And I did take the Lsat. And I did look at law school, but at that point in my life, I really started to question whether that's what I wanted to do or that's what everyone said I should do. So I hit pause. I ended up getting in the working with kids and families. So I started at just a job outside of school, working at independent living facility for adjudicated male delinquents. And then that got me really interested in social work. So I ended up getting a master's in social work. And by this time, I'd moved out to the East Coast, still working with kids and families. I got my master's in social work really with the idea of that I wanted to have the tools to help people solve problems. That was really my big kind of drive or passion. I wanted the tools to help people solve the problems that they were experiencing in their life. And a master's in social work gave me that. So I graduated with that degree, which I did part-time while I worked full-time, and started doing clinical outpatient therapy with kids and families. And two things happened during my time as a social worker. One is I ended up being in court, being an expert witness when it came to termination of parental rights, or visitation issues, or in some cases, even criminal cases, because I actually worked with sexual abuse and trauma. So that was one thing that reignited my interest. The other thing that happened is I had the opportunity to actually testify in front of the State Senate Judiciary Committee about the statute of limitations. And a statute of limitations, if you're not familiar with it, is really a limit on how long someone has before they can bring a lawsuit against someone they believed harmed them. And I was working with adult victims who had been abused as children and now wanted to sue their abuser, but the statute of limitations had expired, even though for many of them, they hadn't even started talking about it until, or even realized the harm that had occurred until they were in their adulthood. So we testified to ask the state legislature to expand the statute of limitations to really give those adults an opportunity to bring cases against their perpetrators. And that felt really powerful to me. And so I started thinking about law school again, because again, I think of my MSW as well as my JD as tools in my toolbox. What can I do to help solve issues in the world? What can I do to help kind of counter injustice? So I had the opportunity to go to law school in Boston as well. I went to Boston College. At that point in time, I'd met the woman that is now my wife. So we met in 1991. And so I only applied to Boston law schools. And I ended up attending Boston College, and I had the luxury of attending full time. And I'll talk about that in a moment as it relates to the colleges of law. So I attended full time, but at the end of my first year, I would say what I'd call it, I'm a middle of the packer. Kind of getting it, but I'm not really getting it. I understood what I was doing, but I didn't really understand what I was doing. And there went this call out to apply for federal clerkships. I was not one of the people that the Career Services kind of said, hey, you should apply for federal clerkships, because I wasn't in the top 10% of my class. I hadn't either graded or written onto law review. And so I just didn't have the pedigree that a federal clerkship would have looked for. But I was working closely with a professor, and she knew my work, and she said, are you going to apply for a clerkship? And I said, no, I'm not clerkship material. And she said, well, if you don't apply, you won't get a clerkship. But if you do apply, you might get a clerkship. So I said, all right, I'll apply. So I sent out all of my applications, and lo and behold, I get an interview, and lo and behold, I get a clerkship. So I had the opportunity to interview and then clerk with the judge who would become the chief judge of the United States District Court for the District of Massachusetts. And it was an absolutely wonderful experience right out of law school. It was like a postdoc. Because that door opened, another door opened, which is I had the opportunity to clerk at the First Circuit Court of Appeals, which is the circuit court like the Ninth Circuit for kind of the West Coast that covers the New England states and Puerto Rico for the most part. And so I had that opportunity as well. And because of that, that opened another door for me, which is I had been kind of more interested in social justice type issues, but I also had some law school debt that I was dealing with. And so I ended up being able to work at a large firm called Choate Hall and Stewart in Boston. And I got great experience there, but like Tony, it didn't fill me with any kind of passion. There were no fun parties to go to, let me put it that way. And so while I had a great experience, I knew that I wasn't a lifer for it. But something happened while I was working for the judge. He had a room full of 9-year-olds who would come to visit the court. And he was talking to them about what lawyers do. And he said, lawyers are teachers. That's what we do. We teach clients, we teach juries, we teach legislatures, we teach. And I thought, wow, what a wonderful way to practice law. I love the idea of teaching. So while I was in Boston working, I started adjunct teaching at the local law schools, and I loved it. And so when the opportunity came, I went on, I looked for a full-time teaching position. And by that time, my wife had gotten a job in Vermont. And so I ended up, luckily, getting a job at Vermont Law School, which is a traditional ABA accredited law school. And we'll talk about the difference between that and my school, which is California Accredited Law School. And so I just fell in love with teaching, and through teaching, I had the opportunity to, again, work on some of that things that really brought me passion, which is social justice issues. So although some of you may not even know what this law is or that it existed at one time, I was able to work on a national not-for-profit board that was part of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell repeal movement. So I was able to work at the national level on Capitol Hill. We would go down and lobby. I wrote a transition paper for both then candidate Obama and candidate McCain about how they could use executive power to kind of lighten the effect of Don't Ask, Don't Tell while we were waiting for Congress to take action. The other thing I was able to do was really work on the marriage equality issues that were percolating in Vermont at that time. Vermont was the first state to actually have a legislative solution to marriage equality, which at that point was civil unions, and then it turned into marriage at a later date. And again, really exciting to be able to see the power of the law to create change, not just at an individual or client level, but really at a local, state, and national level. And so again, more tools in my toolbox to do the kind of work that I wanted to do. I transitioned to administration within legal education first at my previous law school, and now I am the dean of the colleges of law here in Santa Barbara and Ventura. Happy to talk about why I made the decision to move from Vermont, other than I don't have to either shovel or scrape ice off my windshield any longer. The big draw for me were two things. One is I believe, as Judge and Tony talked about, that in order for the justice system that we have in the United States to really be legitimate, that those working in it, lawyers as well as other legal professionals, need to reflect the diversity of the nation. And I knew that the legal profession was struggling with that. And colleges of law was about opportunity, and it was about access. And if you look at the student demographics of the colleges of law, you'll see that it reflects the demographics of California. And the other piece was affordability. I really felt challenged by the idea that students were leaving law school with 150 to 200K in debt. And often it was the students who didn't have the high Lsat scores, that didn't have the high undergrad GPAs, that were being put in the position of paying full tuition, while those with higher Lsats or higher undergrad GPAs would get so-called merit scholarships. And so what we had, because the Lsat, as we know, students of color often struggle with standardized tests, and specifically the Lsat based on the data, that it was often our students of color that were carrying a lot of the debt when they left law school. And what I saw with the colleges of law is that it was dedicated to making legal education not just accessible through an admissions process, but affordable, which for me, accessibility and affordability are connected. So right now, the entire JD costs $70K, which is about 1 year at a full-time law school, depending on if it's private or public, whether or not you're working, whether or not you take out the full amount of loans necessary to live as well. So those are the things that drew me to the law school I'm currently at. And so, Tony, happy to hit pause there, and then we could talk a little bit about the admissions process.
Sounds great. And for those of you who don't necessarily know what a dean of the law school is, just say that they're the boss. They're the ones who's running things. Dean GARDINA is being humble there, but I'll give her props. So give you just a quick overview of the law school application process, at least as it relates to UCLA law and other schools that are accredited by the American Bar Association. As the dean mentioned, the American Bar Association is this entity that governs sort of law school admissions and admissions relating to what lawyers need to do and what law students need to know. UCLA is accredited by the American Bar Association. So that means that if someone were to attend UCLA, they would be entitled to sit for the bar examination in any state in the country. And the dean can help clarify some distinctions as between ABA accredited or California accredited. But that's just kind of just a general sense, so you know what we're talking about. So UCLA is an ABA accredited law school. We are a full-time program, a three-year law school. So you would get your law degree, your Juris Doctorate or JD in 3 years. And that's something you want to think about when you're examining law schools. There are some that are full-time only. Some have a full-time option and a part-time option. Typically, the part-time option would be a 4-year program. And that would be very well suited for someone maybe who is wanting to continue to work full-time or work a heavy schedule while they're in law school. Maybe someone who has a family to try to take care of and make sure that there's time to be a parent while you're in law school. You can be a parent and go to a full-time program, but a part-time program is especially well designed for someone who might want to just take a little slower on the academic side and have more space in their life to accommodate other aspects of it. The components of applying to law school are relatively straightforward and not too dissimilar from other application processes that you've probably gone through. So there's a form application that just asks for some basic information: name, address, where you grew up, where you went to high school, where you went to college, jobs that you've had, extracurricular activities, so forth and so on. So there's the application piece of that. There will be your transcripts. So there'll be your transcripts from SBCC, and then where you go on from there, four-year university from there, those transcripts. There will be an LSAT score, and the LSAT score is a separate piece. The law school admissions test is an entrance examination, not too dissimilar from the SAT or ACT. We can talk about that a bit more in detail later, but that's one piece of the puzzle when you're applying to law school, that you will have this examination. It's about a 3.5-hour examination. It requires, relatively intense preparation over some period of time. This is one area in particular where the profession and law schools are trying to figure out how can students be more supported in this endeavor. For a long time, the success on the SAT has really been a function of your financial means and not so much a function of your capacity or your ability to be an excellent lawyer. I mentioned the Law Fellows program at UCLA. There are several outreach and pipeline programs around the country and in California, and many of them have an LSAT prep component because they recognize that that's one glaring gap or hole in the current process, and one reason for which many underrepresented students aren't getting the kinds of scholarship offers that the dean mentioned, and that's important. And we'll talk about money because that can be a critical factor. Another piece of the application will be letters of recommendation. Generally, they would come from a professor or a TA or a lecturer, but a person you've worked with in an academic capacity. They could also come from someone that you've worked with, and we can talk about the pros and cons of those if there are questions. And then the final piece that I'll mention right now is the personal statement. Personal statement is a very critical part of the application that's designed to give you a chance to let the admissions committee know who you are, some of your more important experiences. In this, I'll say the personal statement can sometimes be the biggest missed opportunity. I'll say that in my work and reading applications over the last 20-something years, a personal statement can be, in some instances, more impactful than undergraduate institution, undergraduate grades, LSAT score. I mean, the best of all things is that you got everything working for you. But personal statement is your opportunity to not to sell yourself, not to brag about yourself, but to share some aspects of you that would otherwise be unknown to the admissions committee. Some aspects of you that might make you more distinct from the run-of-the-mill stereotypical applicant, if you will. And that can be rooted in any one of a number of things. It could be based on where you grew up, how you grew up, your family, your neighborhood, your community, your passions. I think a lot of times people, when they're applying to law school, think that their personal statement they're supposed to use that to help them make themselves sound just like other people applying to law school. So they'll talk about some very generic aspects of their experience. And that, I think, is really going in this exact opposite direction, right? So you want to think about what is it about you, your life, your background, your family, your passions that might distinguish you, right? But not that they're only applicable to you, but that they may be less common amongst people applying to law school. And that might require some bouncing ideas off people that you know. I'll be happy to put my contact information in the chat. So when you get to that point, if you want some help thinking through how you might want to approach your personal statement or your application more generally, I'll be happy to help you think that through. But I'll give you a couple of quick examples. I went to law school with a guy who played professional basketball for 10 years prior to him starting law school. I use his example because he is so far on the extreme, right? He's like off the chart. So don't assume that you have to be a pro ball player. Don't assume you have to be an Olympic gold medalist or first violinist for the Santa Barbara Philharmonic. It's not that serious, right? You don't have to be an outlier like that. But there is something distinctive about each and every one of us. I grew up, as I mentioned, in the San Fernando Valley in the 1960s and 70s. Our family was one of two Black families in the whole area. I went to elementary and junior high schools where my sisters and I were two of a handful of Black kids amongst thousands of white kids. When it came time for me to write my personal statement for law school, I could have written about playing Little League Baseball or Pop Warner football or playing the trumpet in band. I was not very good, but I could have written about playing the trumpet in band. But I couldn't have written an authentic personal statement without talking about what that experience was like for me as a little Black boy growing up in an all-white neighborhood and in a somewhat hostile neighborhood in the 1960s and 70s. So I use that example just to say, think about what's core to you. If you were wanting someone to really get to know you, what would you have to reveal in order for that to be authentic? And that might be some place to start for purposes of a personal statement. So maybe I'll break there, Jackie, and ping it to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you. So unlike Tony's school, the colleges of law is what's called a California accredited law school. So don't know if it was about 100 years ago, a little bit longer, California decided to create a pathway for people to be able to sit for the bar in three different ways. One, they could do what Kim Kardashian is doing, which is a judge's chambers kind of so-called reading for the bar exam and working with the judge's chambers or lawyers. You could attend something called a registered law school, or you could attend a California accredited law school. So like the ABA, the State Bar of California has a set of regulations that our school is supposed to follow to make sure that we're creating a quality legal education. And so what that means in terms of your ability to take the bar, when you first exit law school, you must sit for the bar in the state of California. Graduating from my law school makes you eligible to sit for California. The geographic mobility of your law degree and your practice is going to depend on other states' rules under their board of bar overseers. We do have graduates practicing in multiple states throughout the nation, but it completely is dependent upon that state's rules right now. Our application process is a little bit different. You do not even under state regulations have to have a degree at all. You could actually apply and get into a California accredited law school without a degree. I don't recommend that, and it's a difficult path to do, and you have to go through the state bar first, but it's possible. You can enter some California accredited law schools, including mine, with an associate's degree. And then obviously there's the BA, etc. Law school is very rigorous. It's very different from the undergraduate experience. So having only 2 years of undergrad, having only associate's degree really makes us look closely at other things. So we do a holistic view of your application. So there's your degree, associates, BA, there's your performance within that degree, and not just your performance, but really in the classes that you took. Someone who got a nursing degree with a lot of chemistry is not something I would have succeeded at. And so that's obviously organic chemistry, all those kinds of things versus someone who maybe took a lot of phys ed and did really well in them, because we're looking for that rigor. What's their ability to really dig into dense, difficult material and perform well? But let's say you don't have a lot of academic history, or your academic history is a little bit weak. We're going to look at your work history. Is there some professional experience that really bolsters what is either kind of a shallow academic record or a weak one to show that, yeah, you struggled in the classroom a little bit, but wow, did you mature and grow and really have a strong professional experience either during school or after graduation? Letters of recommendation, like Tony, I think the personal statement and letter of recommendation are missed opportunities. Letters of recommendation that show your ability to really learn, kind of how you take on difficult tasks, that really speak to your ability in the classroom, but maybe outside the classroom as well. You don't want them to be kind of generic letters of recommendation. You want them to communicate to the admissions committee what it is about you and your potential that this recommender believes makes it a good idea for the admissions committee to admit you. I think the personal statement is another place. Like Tony, we hear a lot about this is why I want to be a lawyer, which is absolutely fine and important information to convey. But make sure you write it well. One of the things we're looking for is someone who just has the basic writing skills, because legal writing is a whole different animal. And I think you have to have that grounding in good writing skills. So if right now that's something that you're like, yeah, that's not my best piece, or I avoid writing, do not avoid writing. Go to the writing center, get as much help as you can, because lawyers communicate in writing. It is kind of one of our most important tools. And so you want to go into law school not knowing how to write in terms of a lawyer, but knowing the basic structure, grammar, etc. Your personal statement is going to communicate that as well. Did you have someone read it to make sure that you caught all the errors and the typos? So take your time and really pay attention to that. I think what Tony said about kind of that grit and perseverance, that's a really good message as well. Kind of, were there challenges that you had to overcome? I talked to people who immigrated to the United States when they were like 15. And I always tell students in law school, going to law school is like being dropped into a foreign country. You have to learn a new language, you have to learn new customs, you have to learn how to navigate a new landscape. And some people are going to do it really quickly, and some people it's going to take longer. And it's fine, because the goal is to be able to, when you leave law school, have the basic foundation of a skilled, competent, and ethical attorney. You don't need to have it at the end of your first semester or at the end of your second semester. You just want to keep improving towards that goal point. People who immigrated to the United States have already been dropped into a foreign country. They've already had to learn a new language, learn new customs, and learn how to navigate a new landscape. And so they had to overcome those things already once. And so that's actually a real strength for them. And I talk to them about that being a strength rather than something that they have to overcome. And so grit and perseverance, a challenge that you had to overcome, I think is a really important thing for you to think about in terms of communicating as well. And then, Tony, if I could, I wanted to also talk to them just broadly about the legal industry, because I want them to think about being a legal professional, not necessarily being an attorney. So if you give me a moment, and then we can turn to I know UCLA has some of these same opportunities for students, so maybe we could talk about both. So I'm just going to share my screen really quickly, and so that you guys can see what I'm talking about. So one of the things I want you guys to be thinking about as you think about your futures is that the world is changing rapidly. And what lawyers did 20 or 30 years ago when Tony and I started, some of it looks the same and some of it looks dramatically different. So this is a quote from Mark Cohen that I think is a really important one to hang on to. The legal industry is no longer just about lawyers. There's a lot of opportunities for legal professionals without a license to practice law to really flourish in the legal industry. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that briefly. And Mark Cohen at least describes it as a three-legged stool, law, technology, and business. And so Bill Henderson, let me see if I can move this forward. Bill Henderson did a big report for the State Bar of California about the legal landscape. And he had this sentence, which may not mean as much to you, but for those of us lawyers, understand lawyers, our job is to give legal advice, and no one else is supposed to do that. It's considered the unlicensed practice of law. But what's happening is, like technology is doing in a lot of places, technology is really taking some of what I did as a young attorney and making it something that someone without a license can do. Discovery. I spent an enormous amount of time in warehouses and rooms with boxes of paper that I had to go through. That's all being done in big cases anyway through e-discovery and on a computer. And so it's a very different looking environment. People without a license to practice law are actually engaged in e-discovery. And it's not necessarily neat. You don't necessarily need to have a JD, or you don't necessarily need to have a license to practice if you're going to be involved in something like e-discovery. So some of the jobs that are coming up in what's a market called JD Advantage. So the JD is an advantage in this market, but that also means that while the JD is an advantage, it isn't necessary. So if you just went to Indeed.com and put in legal technology, you're going to see a host of jobs such as these, and you can see e-discovery consultant in there, that are for people who work in the legal industry and support lawyers, but aren't necessarily JDs and don't necessarily have a license to practice. Although these also become JD advantage jobs, or having a JD is an advantage in this market. So when you think about the legal industry, kind of business, entrepreneurship, law, and technology, lots of opportunities out there. And so what colleges of law has done is create a master's of arts in which you can get certificates in 3 of these and really craft a degree that works for the direction you want to go, that works for your strengths, and will help you enter the legal industry without a JD if you want, or if you come and get a JD, you can also engage in getting these concentrations as part of your JD. So don't need to look at that, but just wanted to give you a sense that when you're thinking about what you want to do in the legal industry, you do not have to think about it solely through the lens of a JD, or you don't have to think about it solely through the lens of kind of what Tony and I have been talking about, which is that traditional practice of law. So Tony, thanks for indulging me there. And now we can certainly open it up to answer questions, or Tony, if you want to add anything to that.
The only thing I'll add quickly, which is somewhat related, is that if and when you do decide to go to law school, I would encourage all of you to take advantage of what's called clinical opportunities, which is a chance to do some hands-on work. So rather than lecture-based class, you're in a class that might be a simulation where you're learning how to take a deposition, for example, or how to conduct a trial. And many schools, including UCLA, have what we call live clinics, where as a student, you're able to work on real live cases with real live clients. Example is that we have a criminal defense clinic where students are working under the supervision of their professor, who's a formal criminal defense attorney, representing incarcerated folks. They've been able to get some sentences pardoned. They've been able to get some sentences shortened. They've been able to get some wrongfully convicted folks released. And so that's a way for you as a student in your second or third year to actually do the kinds of things that lawyers do and be making an impact in society, not after you get out, but while you're still a student. So just something to keep your eye on. I think there's really no better way to learn how to be a lawyer than to do the kinds of things that lawyers do. So I'll stop there. So I don't know, is there questions in the chat or Judge, how are we doing this?
I think that hopefully we'll have some students posting some questions in just a moment, but Christina, you can.
Yeah, so thank you both Tony and Jackie for letting us all hear your amazing journeys to where you are now. But right now we just want to open it up to anyone here that would like to ask any questions. You can put that in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So feel free to put some in there.
And in the meantime, I'll riff a little bit. One thing I wanted to mention, which is I think that there's maybe a misconception that everyone going to law school must have had like a very clean, smooth, and straightforward path all the way along, and was a stellar student the whole time. I mean, certainly that's great. If you're sitting there with that, then keep doing that. But we also know that life happens, and so to the extent that there have been maybe some rocky moments in your academic career, maybe you start out slowly, and you were in the wrong fit in terms of the courses you were taking, or you overloaded yourself and took too many courses or whatever it may be, and maybe you got off to a rocky start, but you've been performing better from then on. That's something that you can share with us. And every law school application provides a chance for you to give an explanation or an addendum to provide some additional context, things that we might not know. Maybe there was a family situation going on or a personal situation that got in the way of your academic work. So don't feel as if you have to have everything needs to be just perfect. That's not real. And we're looking for real people, which includes people who may have had some degree of struggle or some points in their life that everything wasn't firing on all cylinders. So be okay about sharing that if that's something that you have. Ideally, though, you'd want to be ending on an upward trajectory, right? Because law schools are looking for folks that are moving in a strong direction. And so where irrespective of where you might have been, finish as strong as you can, and put your best into every class. As cliche as that is, you want to put your best foot forward so that 2, 3, 4 years from now, when you're applying to law school, you have some options, and then you can kind of decide what's the best fit for you.
Thank you, Tony. We actually do have a few questions that just popped up in the Q&A. So first question, what is the best advice you would give to an undergrad student looking to become an attorney if you had to pick only one advice? So either Jackie or Tony.
I vote for Jackie.
I'm not sure I could give one piece of advice. And I think that's the challenge. I think it's very dependent upon the person's situation about what is going to be most beneficial for them. I'll go back to what I said before. There is a law school out there for you. You may not get into your number one choice, but you're going to find some place that is going to allow you to pursue that goal. And what you want to do is prepare yourself to be as successful as you can when you enter that. And I think there's two things that are trip people up early in their law school career. One is, as I said, writing. So work on your writing now. And the second thing is reading comprehension. Lawyers are really subject to enormous amount of text. You've got to read a lot, and you've got to pick apart really complex, sometimes ambiguous things. And it's important that you're comfortable with reading complex things. And right now in our society, we are at a place where we skim things online. We go through things in a very different way than we do when we have a book in front of us and we're really focusing. Really practice on what's called kind of that slow brain, slow reading piece, rather than that fast brain, fast reading piece.
Thank you, Jackie.
Yeah, I would just add, mine is twofold. I'd say, one, you want to have a intermediate to long-term plan, or at least a vision for sort of where you think you're headed, even if that might change. But at the same time, I'll encourage you to have a very short focus in terms of like, what's the next step right in front of you? And what do you need to do in order to master that at the highest level that you can? So if you have a midterm coming up in 2 weeks, but you're thinking about something that's 2 years down the line, odds are you're not going to be so prepared for the midterm as you'd like, right? But if you stack up one good exam after another, one good assignment after another, by the time you get to the end of that term and the end of that year, you stacked up a whole lot of really excellent work. And then you do that again the following year. So long-term, but also very short focus at the same time.
Great. Another good question we have in the box here. How important is selecting and focusing on a concentration important for a prospective law student?
The question is, how important is focusing in undergraduate school? Is it?
Focusing on like a particular concentration. How important is that for a prospective law student?
Got it. Yeah, I would say it's not so important, at least in our view, that we're admitting students from any and all backgrounds. So political science is a traditional one. That was my background, but that's not critical, right? History, English, art, dance, computer science, engineering, painting. I mean, honestly, and what I encourage you to do is do the things that interest you. Generally speaking, we perform best when we're doing something we're into rather than doing something we think that we're supposed to do. So I would find kind of what's your thing, like what's your jam, and to handle your business. And then to the dean's point, you at the same time, if there's some areas that you think you could use to improve, like that your writing ability, you want to challenge yourself to become a better writer, right? And if that means using your writing center, go to your writing center. If that means working with a tutor, don't be too proud, work with a tutor, right? If that means going to your professor or TA and say, hey, I didn't do as well as I would have liked on this exam, can I meet with you to get a sense of how I could have done better, how I can do better the next time, and then incorporate that advice. Be smart and be strategic at the same time.
Great. Yasmin put in the box here. Thank you both for your advice and insight. Regarding GPAs, what would be the target GPA for students applying at a law school?
So there's usually, if I understood the question correct, because I think I read it, yeah. So we actually do require it to be within the year. So I would just ask that person who made the recommendation if they're willing to update it.
Okay, so I misunderstood the question. Was it about letters of rec or about GPA?
GPAs. So I
Oh,
believe,
sorry.
yeah, no worries. I believe the student was kind of asking what should be their target GPA if they are applying to law school.
So this, and whose question was that? I'm sorry, is that Jacqueline's question? Surname?
It's a student's question in the Q&A.
Okay, yeah, so this answer is going to be unsatisfying. I'll preface that to start with, but I'm old school. Your target GPA is the best GPA you can get, right? So yeah, get A's, and if you can't get A's, get A minuses. If you can't get A minuses, get B pluses. But yeah, don't set a lower bar, like set the highest bar, but without driving yourself nuts. I mean, yeah, you want to be sane about it, but get the best GPA you can get. That's your target.
I would agree. And I apologize that I didn't catch it at first. I caught myself reading. I was doing what you shouldn't do, which is multitask. So again, target GPA, I would say exactly the same thing. And if you don't think how you performed in school represents your ability, communicate that to the admissions committee. We always hear, I was working full time. My mom got sick. I had to drop out halfway through. All kinds of things happen that interfere with our ability to be the best we can be. We all know that. So just point that out if that's the case in your world.
Great advice from both of you. Thank you. Another question, realistically, how hard is the LSAT?
Tony, I'll let you take this one.
So it's hard. Let me not play around, but it's doable, and it's a learnable test, right? And that's the thing that I want to emphasize, is that all of you that are on this call now can master the LSAT at a very high level with the proper time and preparation. The thing that you want to realize, though, is that the LSAT is not the kind of test that you can easily cram for. It's not that kind of an animal, right? Think of some skill that you may have developed over the course of your life, an instrument that you played, or a sport, or knitting, or cooking, or whatever it may be. You can't cram to become a great knitter, right? You can't stay up 2 nights in a row and become a great saxophone player, right? It's a skill that you develop through some consistent practice over an extended period of time. Think of the LSAT very much the same way, that it's a skills-based, quote unquote, test, and not, being smart helps, but just being smart isn't enough. So yeah, it's demanding, but it's also doable and learnable with the right approach.
And I think, Tony, are they still doing Khan Academy free access through? Okay, I don't know whether you, I don't know if the Career Services has access to that, but the Khan Academy is doing free preparation, helping students seeking to apply with preparing for the LSAT, because that's always a barrier. That at times those LSAT prep courses can be expensive, and so they're trying to create avenues for people to do it for free. I think I agree with Tony. It's skill-based. Some people, I'm very lucky, for whatever reasons, ever since I was a little kid, my brain worked for standardized test taking from Iowa Basic Skills on up. It took me a little bit to kind of get what's called the logic games on the LSAT. The reading comprehension came pretty easy for me, but the logic games I had to practice. And I really have found the logic games to be an important part of thinking as an attorney. So it's the one thing that I kind of got later that, oh yeah, I actually say to students when I'm teaching them certain things in civil procedure, this is essentially the logic games on the LSAT.
Thank you both. I think this question right here, it might be really interesting for some of our students too, but what kinds of classes do you recommend taking in undergrad to best prepare yourself for law school?
Yeah, I'll take a stab. I know, at least back in the day, everyone said you should take a logic class. I took a logic class in college. I have no idea if that helped me in law school at all. So I'm not going to perpetuate that necessarily. Honestly, certainly classes that involve, writing, as Dean Gardina mentioned, that, writing is a big part of your law school experience, and also presumably, lawyering. So classes that involve writing, but honestly, there's no one set path. I've worked with students that were dance majors who performed very well in law school, students that were art majors. And so, our minds, each of our minds works in different ways. So there's not just sort of one lawyer mind, right? But to the extent that you're able to do some writing, I think would be helpful. Classes that involve some kind of problem solving, I think that can be helpful as well. I don't know, Jackie, if you have something to add on that.
Yeah, one of the things that I think is helpful for students is to get a grounding in American government. So whatever course that might be, because our legal system is really, it starts with that founding document and then the laws in the three and then federalism. And so many students come into law school not having just that basic grounding. Maybe they had it in high school, maybe not. And so if there's an opportunity for you to just take whatever it might be called at SBCC, or if you go on to an undergrad, a basic American government or a civics class, I think that's really helpful to get that foundation.
Hi, Judge Doreen here. I know we're running out of time. It's 5 o'clock. Can I ask if Tony and Jackie, if you're willing, if you could put, I think there's some questions, I think, for you, Tony, about the outreach program for UCLA Law School. I'll also put an email address for the BEST series. If you have any questions, you can email me and I will try to find the answer and get back to you. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Tony, and to Jackie. It's been amazing. I was just texting someone, what a great way to end this series. So I want to thank both of you. I know you're very busy, and your willingness to take time out to talk to our students. And then to the students, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule and showing up here today. This shows that you are absolutely willing to put in the work to be successful. So thank you, everyone.
And keep showing up. Keep showing up. Yeah. And I put my contact information in the chat. Don't hesitate to reach out if I can be of help in any way at any time. Please reach out.
Same
Thank
here. I'm
you.
going to put mine in there as well.
Thank you to our panelists today, and for Judge Von der Royen for putting together this amazing series. We're just so excited to get this also posted on our website for students who missed today or want to come back and listen in. Go ahead and look, if you could just put up our final slide there, and if you want to give us a survey response, we would love that. Just put your camera from your phone on the QR code and it would take you right there. So thank you so much again for coming today.
Thanks, everyone.